Welcome back to FierceFighter. Real talk with FierceFighter. Come in, come in, come in. Like, share, follow, subscribe. Make sure you tag a friend and tag another friend and tag another friend because this is Real Talk with FierceFighter. On today's topic, it's going to be about domestic violence, the hidden violence, psychological violence that many people don't talk about. Excuse my voice. I am kind of hoarse, but I'm gonna do my best to get through it. So as you come into the room, make sure you like and make sure you tap that bell so that you can get notified when I go live. Yep. So I was watching before we get into the live. I want to talk about before we get into the topic. I want to talk about Carmelo Anthony. And the verdict was today. And it's saying that he was found guilty. I don't know, y'all, what's going on in this country, but let me tell you something. That is totally wrong. First of all, he didn't have a jury of peers. And we are all, based on the Constitution, we are all have a right to have a jury of peers. Not one single person on that jury was African American or foundational American. Not one. But yeah, that's on another topic. I just wanted to bring that up because are you guys paying attention to what's happening across this country with black and brown foundational black Americans? Y'all, if you don't know, then you need to get into the news, go scroll through YouTube and watch the patterns of things that's taking place across this country against black foundational Americans. Now, what I do know is what's happening in my city and with these protesters, see, because I live in North, and these protesters that have been here for past a week's time, going on 2 weeks, protesting, tearing up the little area. But in case you don't know, that area is where manufacturers, um, you have it's really nothing. Basically, it's top. Also have for people who need to go to or people who I won't say need, but people who um, are transported to have Delaney Hall, which sits next door, that's currently housing the immigrants. The place is not a good place for nobody to be. To be honest with you, it's not a place where humans could dwell at because of the toxicity. There is no, it's not like that's a residential area. It's just a place where nothing is down there. Shipments, come from in and out of that place. But other than that, it is not residential. And you can smell the sewage when you get in the area. It stinks badly. But let's get into our topic of domestic violence and psychological abuse. So, because people don't talk about the psychological domestic violence because that psychological, I mean, you can see physical abuse through the bruise and scars and marks. However, what you can't see is being abused psychologically. And I'm going to pull it up in a minute because I want you to understand that psychological abuse is not the same as physical abuse. One second. So here it has emotional and psychological abuse. Emotional and psychological abuse is a form of or exposing another person to a behavior. Right? And it gives some signs of psychological and emotional abuse. And it's important to be aware of the signs and symptoms of abuse so that you can help yourself or someone who you may know who may be experiencing it. Silence. There may be an air of silence when a particular person speak up or because the abuser has created a climate of fear and intimidation from social activities, become isolated from friends, family, or experience changes in their mood or behavior. In my personal experience, I've seen it. Although I have never experienced psychological abuse, I've experienced physical. I'm a one and done person, and once, you know, you hit me, he hit me, that was it. Because at the end of the day, if somebody love you, they don't hit you, right? To control you. And when somebody look at you, you got to get hit because somebody looked at you. You get hit because you're just crazy things that the abuser is going through. The victim suffers, with that. And I always told everybody, thank God I'm a survivor. I've always told everybody I would rather get beat before I endure or be exposed to psychological abuse because to me, that's the worst form of abuse. It is hard to redirect that person because it kind of gets to change the thought process, right? So yeah, you know, but even though no abuse is okay. It's never okay to be abused or to abuse. So is experiencing this. And listen, those of you who may know somebody that's experiencing it, you have to be very patient with them, right? But you have to be very supportive and you have to let them know that you're there, when they want to come around, because sometimes it takes time for people to come around, but make sure that if you know somebody who's in a relationship, but at least if they leave with their most important documents, such as identification, birth certificate, social security card, as long as they have those documents, they can move on, keep it in a safe space all at all times, because sometimes you have to leave in a split when it's dealing with physical abuse or when you're trying to leave it. Um, you know, there may be an air of with silence when a particular person because when a certain person is present, will go silent around them, won't talk, won't speak, or be afraid to speak because the abuser has created that climate, of fear and intimidation. And then withdrawal is another way or another symptom that you'll notice when you're with that person who's being abused. They may withdraw from social activities. They become very isolated from friends and family or experience changes in their mood or behavior. You'll notice it when, they change their attitude towards you. They never act a certain kind of way towards you, and then all of a sudden they're irritable and things of that nature. Yeah, 9 times out of 10, they're in the withdrawal stage. And then insomnia, sometimes they can't sleep. That's another symptom. Insomnia, the victim may have trouble sleeping, experience nightmares, because that often happens because when they're physically being abused and psychologically, emotionally, it's always a roller coaster, right? Um, Emotionally, after they verbally abuse you, they play comfortable, they make you feel like how they supposed to treat you. And then as soon as you open up and put your guard down, boom, here comes another emotional attack against you. So be careful with people who do that too. I know I experienced that. Now that I experienced firsthand until I realized I will not be abused emotionally ever again. And so, that person is still around. That person don't necessarily um, want any involvement with me. This is a relative because they can't control my emotions. See, I learned how to control my emotions when I'm dealing with that particular family member because for a very long time, that relative controlled my emotion and abused me emotionally over and over and over and over and over again until I walked away. And now it don't bother me the things that they do. So they don't want to be around me no more. They don't want to reach out to me no more. They don't want to speak to me no more because they have lost control of my emotions. They know they can't control me anymore with the things that they say, with the things that they do. It doesn't bother me anymore. So kudos to me for healing in that area. But yeah, these are some of the things that experience. And then low self-esteem. The victim may have low self-esteem or feel worthless. Yeah, I've seen that too. You know, um, and it happens because they become verbally abusive, tell you ain't gonna be nothing, you ain't worth nothing, don't nobody love, don't nobody care about you. And they start pointing, the abusers start pointing out, different people. See, I told you, aha. They always have their aha moments to break down their victim. And see, I was always taught that an abuser was once and once was once abused. So these are the things, and it sort of kind of is true for real because when you have abandonment issues, right? However, if you don't heal properly from that, then you become an abuser as well. So yeah, sometimes that's why I say this in part, facts. Um, because some people, so so it didn't happen for me. to take and love all over people and give people the love and the support and the treatment that I yearned when I was emotionally abused by a relative. So I created family members, with people that I've encountered that I see are struggling in different areas, that looks or appears as if they've come from a toxic relationship, be it domestic violence, as far as physical, emotional, and psychological. So then they become, okay, it's coming back in. They become uncooperative and demonstrate aggressive behavior. Towards the abuser. And then uh, you'll notice their changes in appetite, right? They might experience either weight gain or weight loss, because some abusers like to call their some abusers like to call their victims, "Oh, you're fat, you're ugly," say mean and nasty things. "You're so bony. You need to eat more." Things of that nature, just to break them down um, psychologically, in their mind. Because once they have control of the mind, that's it. And I can go deeper. However, I'm going to keep it neutral. And I have another platform where I can talk about spirituality. Then signs of distress. The victims show signs of distress, such as tearfulness. They always teary eyed, angry, or they develop anxiety. And then false claims. Someone involved with the victim may make false claims to attract unnecessary treatment. And I'm noticing that all too often from I experienced that with my granddaughter. Um, and when I first seen the symptoms of psychological abuse from her last year, I immediately got her some therapy, psychological therapy, right? And because you have to undo the damage that was caused from a person, and psychological runs very, very deep when we're talking about domestic violence and psychological abuse. If you don't have people and your support, I'm talking strong support in your corner to help you and walk you through everything that you experience with your abuser, then it's hard. And so you have to treat it before it grows, because once it grows, you become the abuser instead of the victim. The victim chooses. And it's not right, it's not fair. But they don't talk about, and I feel like I want to run a whole campaign about psychological abuse. Because even though I experienced emotional abuse from my relative, right? Psychologically, psychologically, um, I was in my thoughts all the time, and I would say things like, if you didn't love me, or if you weren't going to treat me right, if you were going to mishandle me, then why did you give birth to me? I used to say that all the time, just all the time. And I always would be crying all the time. And thank God I had my grandmother and my father's family, sisters and mother, in my life, and my father too, to reinforce how smart I was, how beautiful I was, how courageous I was. Some people, they don't have a strong support system. And this is why it's so important that when you see those symptoms that I just, and then you have to pay very close attention because even though um, even though psychological abuse is to hard to see, it's really not hard to see. You just have to learn the symptoms of psychological abuse because it speaks loud. But if you don't know the symptoms, you won't know what to look for. See, it's easier to detect physical abuse leaves behind bruises, marks, and scars. Psychological abuse, it doesn't. It's just very loud in a subliminal way, in a subtle way, if that makes sense to you. So I'm going to read all of the symptoms once again of emotional and psychological abuse. And it's put together because emotional and psychological abuse is almost the same, right? So you have number one, silence. Number two, withdrawal. Number three, insomnia. Number four, low self esteem. Number five, uncooperative and aggressive behavior. And I'm gonna just go ahead and read that one again because when you'll normally see a person who's being victimized by an abuser, a psychological abuser, you'll see them turn on their abuser when they get in public or get around people where they know that they are protected. You'll see them become very aggressive or uncooperative around them. So just like really pay attention to that. And then you have changes in appetite. You'll see them eating more or eating less. They'll gain more weight or less weight. Then you'll see signs of distress. They're always crying all the time. Remember earlier I said, when things were said to me, mean things were said to me, um, I would cry all the time. I wasn't, I didn't have a voice. I found my voice, where I was able to speak up. But other than that, I would cry all the time. I didn't think people wanted to be around me. I didn't think I was pretty enough. I didn't think that I had, because I used to be very skinny when I was younger, so I didn't think that I was pretty enough. I didn't think I was worth enough. Like it was just a lot of things going on in my mental back when I was younger, and I'm thankful that I had a grandmother and I had my father's side of the family to assist me along the way to develop a sense of self worth and higher self esteem and high standards. And I had that, and my dad too, because even though my dad, was going through what he was going through, he always had some reinforcements that he used to talk to me, and I call it lecturing me. But my dad always, made sure that whatever he was going through, he always made sure that I was smart. He always told me that I was smart. He always told me that I could do it. He always encouraged me. So, kudos to my dad, you know, and who were there all the way. My maternal grandmother was the one who introduced me to biblical principles. And once I got to know who I was off, I was off. I went off running. I became sure in who I was, but it's not easy for somebody who don't have a strong support system or who don't have a support system at all. And the last one is false claims. Like what they'll do is they'll make up things, right? Somebody who is involved with a victim, who's involved with the victim, may make false claims. Like, for instance, when you're trying to love on somebody who's coming from being victimized psychologically, you'll notice that they make false claims. They'll make up anything that's not true, to get some attention, right? Because they're psychologically damaged, right? That's why it's so critical and so important for people who've exiting a psychological domestic violence to get help immediately, get some therapy. Listen, psychological therapy, they do have some out there. I encourage anybody to get psychological therapy because they can go deep into the psychological damage and help fix things and repair, will help repair things. And it's very damaging, you know. And I'm going to let you know that if you are experiencing emotional or psychological abuse, it is important to seek, some assistance from a trusted friend or a family member or professional. Like I said, a therapist, right, or a counselor to help you understand what is happening and to develop coping mechanisms, right? They can also help you develop a safety plan if you are in danger, in real danger, because a victim who has suffering psychological damage, um, always tend to um, take flight. Their senses make them go in flight mode, right? Because they're damaged psychologically and they haven't developed any coping skills, right? Coping mechanisms to help them through the moment, and they perceive a safe place as a dangerous place, or if they're in danger and start making things up, if that makes sense to you, right? Now, there are barriers, to victims getting, help, like the fear of the abuser, right? They might fear that if the abuser find out that they're getting help, that the abuser might do something to them. Shame and guilty may feel like they're going behind the abuser's back, and and doing something that they should not be doing, or they may think that they deserve the abuse sometimes, right? Or that they are doing something wrong, right? And then you have lack of knowledge or resources. Victims may not know where, to turn for help. They may not trust because of the psychological damage, right? Or they may not even know about the resources that's available. So if you're tuning in, I'm going to say like, share, subscribe, tag somebody that need to be hearing this. If you don't want to come outright and say, listen, sis, you need to go get you some help, or bro, you need to go get some help, just tag them in this. You don't have to say anything. Just tag them in it. Just barriers, like lack of transportation or finances or childcare, things of that nature that the abuser try to use to control their victim. But yeah, so I'm going to go deeper on my other platform because there is a spiritual connection. I know I just went over the natural way, right? But there is a spirituality or spiritual reason, um, for a lack of better words, that it exists, right? And I want to dive deeper into that because I noticed earlier when I was trying to segue into the particular topic of psychological abuse, I ran into a lot of technical issues. However, this needs to get out. Tag somebody. Remember, like, subscribe, and make sure you look at all of the other topics. Right now, I usually, go every night, 7 p.m. However, I want to take a little break So tap that bell because I'm not sure if I'm going to go live tomorrow night. However, if you tap the bell, you'll be notified that I am live, so you won't miss it. But I need some time to work on my voice. As you can hear, it's raspy, and I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't hurt. But my vocals, I feel like I'm straining to have just this little conversation with you. So I want to take a little time to work on my voice so that you all can hear me clearly. And again, tap that bell so that when I go live, you can hear. Now, this is Real Talk with Fierce Fighter. Listen, we just talked about psychological abuse, especially police officers, because one one last thing before normally the abuser will use the system. It doesn't matter whether it's the court system or the police, law enforcement. They use the system and abuse the system because remember, they were once the abuser. And so what they do is they abuse the system and weaponize it against their victim. That also um, creates psychological damage, right? Psychological damage to a person who needs to get some therapy. And police officers, law enforcement, the courts, judges, I feel like they all should be trained on what to look for when you're dealing with individuals who are being psychologically abused. Now, I just went over a list of symptoms. I feel like law enforcement, the system, or the courts should be knowledgeable about the different signs and symptoms of the abuser or the victim or psychological domestic violence. So thank you guys for tuning in. And for my replay gang, thank you for rewatching. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and tap that bell so that next time you can be notified. Now, listen up. This is Real Talk with Fierce Fighter, where we talk about real individuals. We have real conversations, right, that make a real impact. So, tag somebody who you might know who needs to hear what we just discussed on tonight and let us help them get their freedom, grab their voice, and be heard. So until we meet again, this is Real Talk with Fierce Fighter. Thanks for tuning in.